January 30th, 1945, 9:08 p.m. The Baltic Sea. 3 torpedoes slam into the hull of the MV Wilhelm Gustloff. The massive ocean liner, carrying over 10,000 people, shudders and begins to list. Within 1 hour, more than 9,000 souls, most of them women and children, will disappear beneath the freezing water. This single event killed more people than the Titanic and Lusitania combined. It remains the deadliest maritime disaster in recorded history. Yet for decades, almost no one knew it happened. The first torpedo hits the bow, flooding the lowest compartments where hundreds of refugees are packed together. The second strikes midships, ripping through what used to be a swimming pool. The third destroys the engine room. The lights go out. The ship begins to die. In the darkness, over 10,000 people fight for their lives. Most are civilians, refugees fleeing the advancing Soviet army. Mothers clutch children. Soldiers push past the elderly. The few lifeboats that aren't frozen to the deck are rushed by desperate crowds. Crew members fire guns into the air to stop people from swamping the boats. Those who make it into the water face temperatures below freezing. Survival time, minutes. By morning, small bodies float face down in the Baltic. Children whose adult-sized life jackets flip them upside down once they lost consciousness, drowning them instead of saving them. 1 hour after the torpedoes hit, the Wilhelm Gustloff vanishes beneath the surface. German ships rush to the scene. They pull 1,239 survivors from the sea. Over 9,300 people are dead. 5,000 of them are children. 100 feet below the surface, Soviet submarine S-13 slips away. Its commander, Captain Alexander Marinesko, has just carried out the most lethal submarine attack in history. But how did a single torpedo strike kill so many people? And why was this massive ship, packed with civilians, sailing through enemy waters in the middle of the night with its lights on? To understand this catastrophe, we need to go back to the beginning. The Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't built for war. It was built for propaganda. Launched in 1937, this 25,000-ton luxury liner was the pride of the Nazi Strength Through Joy program, a scheme designed to offer cruises to German workers and show off the supposed benefits of the Nazi system. The ship was 684 feet long, designed to carry 1,463 passengers in identical cabins. Everyone got the same room, the same access to the pool and cinema, except for one exclusive suite reserved for Adolf Hitler himself. It was supposed to represent Nazi equality. Instead, it would become a tomb. By January 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing. The Soviet Red Army had smashed through German defenses and was pushing deep into East Prussia. Millions of German civilians fled west in panic, terrified of Soviet revenge for what Germany had done during its invasion of Russia. Adolf Hitler refused to allow an organized military retreat, trapping both soldiers and civilians against the Baltic coast. The only way out was by sea. The German Navy launched Operation Hannibal, one of the largest sea evacuations in history. Over 15 weeks, nearly 1,000 ships carried somewhere between 800,000 and 900,000 civilians and 350,000 soldiers across the Baltic to safety. It was bigger than Dunkirk. But it was also far deadlier because Soviet submarines were hunting these ships. The Wilhelm Gustloff was one of the largest vessels in this evacuation, but by this point, the Gustloff was no longer a cruise ship. The German Navy had seized it in 1939 and converted it into a floating barracks for submarine trainees. They painted over its white hull with military grey. And critically, just before its final voyage, they mounted anti-aircraft guns on deck and loaded it with about 1,000 naval personnel, U-boat trainees who were valuable military assets. This decision changed everything. Under international law, the ship was now an armed military transport. It had no protection as a civilian vessel. On January 30th, 1945, the scene at Gotenhafen harbour was chaos. Thousands of refugees pushed onto the docks, desperate to escape before the Soviets arrived. The Gustloff, designed for fewer than 2,000 people, was packed with an estimated 10,000 to 10,600 people. The vast majority were civilians, women, children, and elderly Germans, plus Poles, Lithuanians, and Estonians, all fleeing the same threat. Up to 5,000 children were aboard. The overcrowding created disaster before the ship even left port. There weren't enough lifeboats. Many that existed were frozen solid to the deck. Below deck, the crush of bodies created so much heat that people took off their life jackets just to breathe. It was a decision that would kill them. The ship had two captains, Friedrich Petersen, a civilian merchant marine officer, and Wilhelm Zahn, a German Navy commander. They disagreed on how to sail. Zahn wanted to zigzag to avoid submarines. Petersen wanted to go straight and fast, and he wanted to keep the ship's lights on to avoid hitting German minesweepers he believed were in the area. They compromised. Zigzag course with lights on. It was a fatal mistake. The lights turned the massive ship into a beacon in the darkness, and the escort ship meant to protect them, the torpedo boat lower, had frozen sonar equipment. They were blind, lit up, and sailing into waters patrolled by Soviet submarines. Soviet submarine S-13 was hunting in the Gulf of Danzig that night. Its commander, Alexander Marinesko, was a skilled submarine captain with a troubled record. He was known for drinking, insubordination, and conflicts with his superiors. This patrol was a chance to redeem himself. Just before 8 p.m., an officer on S-13 spotted lights on the horizon. When the snow cleared, Marinesko climbed to the conning tower and saw an enormous ocean liner, fully lit, clearly visible. He spent 2 hours shadowing the Gustloff, positioning his submarine for the perfect shot. Inside the German ship, passengers listened to Adolf Hitler's speech over the loudspeakers, marking 12 years since the Nazi Party took power. They had no idea what was coming. At 9:08 p.m., Marinesko fired 4 torpedoes. 3 hit their target. The ship died fast. Power failed. The hull flooded. The ship tilted sharply, making evacuation nearly impossible. Lifeboats smashed against the tilting hull. People jumped into water cold enough to kill them in minutes. Those trapped below deck drowned as the compartments filled. In just over an hour, the Wilhelm Gustloff was gone. German rescue ships pulled 1,239 people from the water. The torpedo boat T-36 saved 564. The Lowe, despite its broken equipment, rescued 472. Minesweepers and merchant ships saved the rest, but they were racing against the cold and the threat of more submarines. Out of over 10,000 people aboard, fewer than 1,300 survived. More than 9,300 were dead. 90% were civilians. 5,000 were children. The German military buried the story immediately. Admiral Dönitz knew that announcing the loss of 9,000 people, mostly civilian refugees, would cause mass panic among the millions still trapped in the East. The disaster was classified and hidden. The Soviets celebrated the sinking as a successful attack on a German military transport. They praised Marinesko for his tactical skill while downplaying the civilian deaths. But despite sinking the Wilhelm Gustloff and the General von Steuben 10 days later, killing 4,000 more, Marinesko received no immediate honors. His disciplinary record caught up with him. He was dismissed from the Navy in 1945. He spent decades in obscurity. Only later, after historians recognized that he'd sunk more tonnage than almost any other Soviet submarine commander, was he posthumously named Hero of the Soviet Union. The Wilhelm Gustloff wasn't alone. In just 3 months, Soviet submarines sank 3 massive refugee ships, the Gustloff with over 9,300 dead, the Goya with 6,000 to 7,000 dead, and the General von Steuben with over 4,000 dead. The 3 worst maritime disasters in history happened within weeks of each other, in the same stretch of sea. For decades after the war, the story remained buried. In West Germany, talking about German civilian suffering was complicated by the Holocaust and German war crimes. In East Germany, the Soviet-aligned government wasn't interested in highlighting Soviet attacks on refugees. The Wilhelm Gustloff existed in a historical silence, known mainly to survivors and their families. The controversy around the sinking comes down to a difficult question. Was this a legitimate military attack or a war crime? Legally, it was a legitimate target. The Wilhelm Gustloff was armed, carried military personnel, and had been converted into a military transport. Under the laws of war, Marinesco had every right to sink it. But morally, the outcome is impossible to ignore. 9 civilians died for every soldier. 5,000 children drowned or froze to death. The ship was a legitimate target, but the German command created the disaster by packing it with refugees, sailing it with lights on, and sending it into enemy waters with broken escort protection. The responsibility lies with the decisions that made mass death inevitable when the military strike came. The Wilhelm Gustloff began as a propaganda tool, a symbol of Nazi prosperity and social order. It ended as an overcrowded, desperate refuge for thousands fleeing the collapse of that same system. Built to carry fewer than 2,000 passengers in comfort, it died carrying more than 10,000 in terror. The wreck lies in the Baltic Sea, officially designated as a war grave. It's protected from disturbance, a submerged monument to the largest loss of life in a single ship disaster in history.